In today's video, I'm going to share 3 super simple stitch options that are perfect for those days when you just want to relax and get lost in something mindless. Not only are they beautiful, but they're also one-row repeats, making them so easy that you can go on autopilot. So whether you're looking for something to wind down with or you need a quick project for a last-minute gift, I think you're really going to love these stitches as much as I do. Now you'll notice that these have a lot of color changes, which of course means a lot of ends, but if you really want to make this a stress-free project, I'd recommend that you use a self-striping or ombre yarn. This way the yarn can do all of that work for you and you're still going to have an amazing result. Now I don't mind color changes, so for this video I used a weight 4 cotton yarn with a 3.5mm hook. And while we're speaking about hooks, one quick tip I'd like to give is to go up about a half size larger for your starting chain. That's what I did for these samples. I started with a 4mm hook for the starting chain, and then I went down to my 3.5 for the rest of the sample. And I do that because it really does help to keep the project nice and flat and straight. Otherwise you might get that kind of rainbow effect where your starting chain starts to arch up on you. That can be so frustrating, and it's simply because that starting chain is tighter than the rest of the project. So let's go ahead and start with the classic granny stripe. Now typically I usually make this as a 2-row repeat, but I really wanted to share the super easy one that's a 1-row repeat. It's my new favorite way of doing the granny stripe. To work the granny stripe, we're going to start with a multiple of 3 plus 1. So you're going to make your chain as wide as you like, going in groups of 3, 3, 3, 3, all the way across. And then when you get to the very end, add 1 more. So for example, I'm starting with a chain of 18 plus 1, giving me a total of 19 chains. Adding a slip knot to my hook, wrapping the yarn around my fingers, going through the center, pulling the yarn through, and tightening. To begin row 1, add a double crochet into the 4th chain from the hook. 1, 2, 3, 4. To do a granny cluster stitch, it's 3 double crochets into the same stitch. The turning chain here does count as a stitch, so far we have 2. So let's add 1 more into the same chain. And that's your first granny cluster stitch completed. One thing you're going to notice as we're going across, your chain is going to get really wide. Just pull on your chain to kind of even everything out as you go. Next, skip 2 chains and add 3 double crochets into the 3rd chain. And now we're just going to do this all the way across. Skip 2 chains and add 3 double crochets into the 3rd chain. Double check when you come to the end that you have 3 remaining chains. 1, 2, 3. Good, we're on track. In that very last chain, just add 1 double crochet. And now we're ready for row 2, which is the row that you're going to continue using for the entire project. Now, I'm not going to be color changing here. I'm just going to stick with the same color. But if you do want to know how to do color changes for any of these stitches, you can find out how to do that at the very end of the video. Chain 2 or 3 and turn. And this will serve as your first double crochet. I prefer to use 2 chains if I'm just chaining. But for all of these samples, I'm going to be doing a stacked single crochet instead. If you want to do the same thing, turn your work, and in the very first stitch, add a single crochet. And then in the sidebar here of the single, pull your yarn through, yarn over, pull through 2. This gives you the bulk and the height of a standard double crochet. Next, add 2 double crochets into the space below. This is going to complete our first granny cluster of this row. And now all we're doing is skipping over to the next space to create another cluster of 3 double crochets. Continue this across, add 3 double crochets in the next available space. When you come to the end and you've filled the last available space, add 1 double crochet into the very final stitch. You'll notice with row 2, you always begin with a granny cluster of 3 double crochets, and then you end the row with 1 double crochet into the very last stitch. And with that said, you're going to repeat row 2 until you complete your project. Okay, let's move on to the gorgeous V-stitch. Another classic that's super simple but has such a beautiful result. To work the V-stitch, we're going to start with a multiple of 3. Again, I'm using a 4mm to start, and I'm going to do a chain of 18, just for this little sample. Switching to my 3.5 now. To make a V-stitch, we're going to do a double crochet, chain 1, double crochet into the same stitch. So to begin, we're going to start that in the 4th chain from the hook. Remember, we don't count the chain that's on the hook itself. 1, 2, 3, 4. Double crochet, chain 1, and double crochet into the same chain. The turning chain over here is going to serve as a double on the side, and then you have your V-stitch. Now we're going to skip 2 chains and then do a V-stitch into the 3rd stitch. Remember, that's a double crochet, chain 1, double crochet into the same chain. And we're just going to continue this all the way across, skip 2 chains, and add a V-stitch into the 3rd. We're stretching out these chains a lot, so remember to just pull on your chain, otherwise you might accidentally lose a chain. If it gets too tight, it can disappear. When you come to the end, you should see 2 remaining chains. Skip 1 and work a double crochet into the final chain. I'm going to be using the same color for row 2, but if you want to learn how to do a color change, you can find the tutorial at the end of the video. And now we're ready for the 1 row repeat. We're just going to repeat row 2 for the entire project. Chain 2 or 3 to serve as your first double crochet. I prefer a chain 2, but I also like doing the stacked single, so I'm going to continue doing that. Same thing, turn your work to get ready for row 2. Going into the 1st stitch, pull the yarn through, create a single crochet, going into the sidebar, pull the yarn through, create a single crochet. And now it's really easy. We're just adding a V-stitch into the V-stitch from the previous row. Now, if you're not careful, it can be really tricky, and you might accidentally think you need to go into the spaces between the V-stitches. That's not what you want to do. You want to go in where there's a chain space. So a quick little tip here, when you're looking at your V-stitch, I look for this little bump from the back of the stitch. If I see that, I'm not working into that space below it. I'm looking for that little crisscross with the chain. And then I know I'm within that V-stitch. And so we just do a double crochet, chain 1, double crochet into the V-stitch from below. And now again, another V-stitch into the previous V-stitch, double, chain 1, double. And you're just going to do this all the way across in every V-stitch. When you come to the end, you're going to add 1 double crochet into the very last stitch. And that's all you're going to do. You're going to repeat row 2 until you complete your project. And notice here that you always begin with a double crochet and you always end with a double crochet. And you're just doing V-stitches into the top of the V-stitches from the previous row. And now we're ready for the stacked shell stitch. I really love the shell stitch, so I was so excited when I found a 1-row repeat version that I could show you today. For this one, we're going to start with a multiple of 4 plus 1 more at the very end. So you'll do blocks of 4 chains, 4, 4, 4, all the way across. And then when you come to the very end, add 1 more. So for this little sample here, I'm going to start with a chain of 24 and then add 1 more to give me a total of 25. Again, I'm using a half size larger for the chain. Switching to my 3.5. To form our shell stitch, we're going to use 5 double crochets into the same stitch. So to begin that, let's do 5 double crochets into the 5th chain from the hook. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The chain here does not count as a stitch, by the way. Do all 5 of your double crochets into that chain. The turning chain is going to serve as a stitch later, but it's not included as part of that shell stitch. Next, skip 3 chains, 1, 2, 3, and then work 5 double crochets into the 4th chain. We're putting a lot of stitches into one chain, so be sure to just stretch it out as you go, just so you don't lose one of your chains. It's very easy to get so tight that it disappears. And then just continue all the way across, skipping 3 chains and working 5 doubles into the 4th chain. When you come to the end, you should see 4 remaining chains, 1, 2, 3, 4, and instead of doing another shell stitch, just do 1 double crochet. If you want to change colors, you can find out how to do that at the very end of the video. I'm going to continue on with the same color. So let's continue on with the 1-row repeat on row 2. Chain 2 or 3 to serve as your first double crochet and turn. Or you can do a stacked single like I like to do here. Just turning, adding a single crochet into the very first stitch of this row, and then adding another single into the sidebar here. Now to stack our shell stitches, we're going to work 5 double crochets into the middle of the shell stitch from the previous row. So that's in the 3rd stitch. And if you have a hard time finding the 3rd stitch or the middle, just count these little bumps or the back of the stitch, 1, 2, 3, and then work into the side of it, making sure to go under the 2 strands of yarn at the top, which look like a V. So we're doing 5 double crochets. And then we're just going to continue this all the way across, skipping over to the next shell stitch and working 5 doubles into the top of the 3rd double crochet. 1, 2, 3. We're at our last shell stitch, 1, 2, 3. Okay, and then in the very last stitch, you're going to add a double crochet to form the side. So the main thing to notice with your 1 row repeat, you're always going to begin with a double crochet and you're always going to end with a double crochet. And then you'll just add 5 double crochets into the middle of the shell stitch from the previous row. Continue this until you complete your project. If you decide that you do want to change colors instead of using a self-striping yarn, there are a few ways that you can go about it. You can completely fasten off, cut your yarn, and reattach. But the most common way is to complete your very last stitch with your new color that you want to add. For all 3 of these samples, the very last stitch in the row is a double crochet. So what you can do is, instead of completing that double, when you have 2 loops remaining on your hook, this is where you can bring in your new color, pull the yarn through. What I like to do is snip the yarn and then tie those 2 sides together just to help maintain that tension a little bit. And then I continue on with the pattern. Another way you can do it is to complete the very last stitch all the way. And then take your hook and just go into the 2 side bars of yarn here. And then take your new color and just pull it through that way. Pull on the yarn from the old color. And again, same thing, I like to just tie those ends together to help tension that yarn, and then continue on with the pattern. Essentially, both of these are the same thing. You're just doing one step later than the other. So really, it's just a preference of what feels better to you. If you enjoyed the video, a like is always appreciated. Your support means the world to me. And if you enjoy patterns that are just 1 row repeats like the ones that you saw today, be sure to let me know in the comments and I'll make another video just like this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.